again, we are so excited to have Doug with us tonight to learn all about oaks. Doug Tallamy is the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he has taught insect-related courses for 41 years. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. Doug is an accomplished author, including Bringing Nature Home, The Living Landscape, Nature's Best Hope, and The Nature of Oaks, which he will be featuring tonight. So at this point, I will turn things over to Doug.
Thank you, Amy. I just noticed your acorn blouse. It's very nice.
Yes, I wore it for tonight.
I'll have to get one like that. Okay, let it be an oak, the nature of oaks, whatever we want to call this. It's going to start by following oaks that we planted on our property when we moved in the year 2000. This is what our house looked like. It was part of a farm that was broken up, and it had been mowed for hay before we moved in. So there were very, very few woody plants at all. There were one or two small black oaks, but that was it. No white oaks, no anything else. So our goal was to restore the biodiversity here. And that fall in September, we moved in July. In September, a couple of large white oaks, about 1.5 miles down the street, dropped a number of acorns. So we got some of those acorns and we planted them. And of course, white oaks germinate in the fall. They send down a root, a radical. And that's all they do in the fall. And they just sit there all winter. And in the spring, they will send up their first leaves. And then it seems like that's all they do in the spring. And this gives oaks a reputation of growing very slowly, because that first year, they are growing 10 times more root biomass than leaf biomass. All the growth goes into roots. And of course, we can't see that. But that's a really important period of growth for oaks, because they are laying down a root system that will support them well the rest of their life. So here's our oak in year 2. I've got a deer cage around it, because we've got a lot of deer. And they do like oaks. So here it is, 18 years later, 45 feet tall, 47-inch circumference, a canopy spread of 30 feet. It's still a baby, of course, but it's a real landscape tree. And it didn't take that long. One of the things I want to focus on tonight is all of the creatures that oaks support. They are a lifeline to many, many species. Dozens of species of birds depend on oaks. A number of mammals, including bats that I don't have up here. I got to get it up there. Not that many reptiles depend on oaks, but there are several butterflies that are specialists on oaks, and hundreds of species of moths that use oaks, as well as their predators and parasitoids. We've got synipid gall wasps that, of course, depend on oaks. Many beetles, June beetles, longhorn beetles, metallic wood-boring beetles, weevils. Then there's all the other invertebrate predators like spiders, and dozens of arthropods and mollusks and annelids that depend on oak leaf litter underneath that oak tree. The problem, of course, is that this is a very diverse web of life, but it typically goes unnoticed by people who have oaks in their yards. If it's unnoticed, then it is unappreciated. And that is exactly why I wrote the book, The Nature of Oaks. I want people to appreciate all the things that oaks do for you in your yard, particularly supporting the life around you. So The Nature of Oaks is a month-by-month guide to the life that occurs on your oaks. And the object was to provide the knowledge that would hopefully generate interest in the public, and then that interest often leads to compassion. And we need a lot more compassion towards the natural world these days. So that's why I wrote the book. First, a few facts about the genus Quercus. It contains 91 species in North America, 435 species globally. So for a deciduous tree, it's a large genus. The word Quercus comes from the Celtic quer, meaning fine, and ques, meaning tree, and oaks are indeed fine trees. There are 4 major taxonomic sections in the genus in North America: the white oak group, called the Quercus group; the red oak group, Lobate; live oak group is Verentes, mostly down south; and a much smaller canyon oak group, Protobalanus, in the west. This is the distribution of oaks in the US. The brown area is the only place where there are no oaks that occur naturally. Every other color has at least one species. Center of distribution in North America is the Southeast, but the real center of distribution for oaks in North America is Mexico. There's over 250 species of oaks just in Mexico. And then they peter out as they go north. Oaks live a long time. 900-year average lifespan, believe it or not, 300 years of growth, 300 years of stasis, and then 300 years of decline. And during each one of those periods of growth, they deliver unique ecological contributions to the landscape around them. And if you wonder why most of the oaks that we know in our yards, I mean, don't live 900 years, it's because we mess with them in some ways. Typically, their root system. Their root runs into a foundation or a pipeline or a roadway or something that interrupts the root systems. And we also typically starve them to death. And I will talk about that in a few minutes. Everybody wants to know what the oldest oak in the country is. And this is controversial. People argue about it. A coastal live oak in California is estimated to be 2,000 years old, called the Penchaca oak. But there is an oak which is almost a ground cover called the Palmer oak. It's a species that grows very low, and it moves along, and it'll die here, but it's rooted over here, and it just kind of clones itself and moves along the landscape. This specimen is estimated to be 13,000 years old. So the true winners are these very unimpressive, low-growing shrubby oaks. Oaks can get big. Some oaks can get big, I should say. This is the Y oak in Y, Maryland. It is gone at this point, fell over in a hurricane, I don't know, 15, maybe even 20 years ago. I did get to see it before it fell over. So it was the largest white oak in the country. There are other large ones out there. But one of the points I want to make today is that not all species are large. So there is an oak for every size yard. We've got to get more of them into the trade, but they are out there. Okay, oaks have superior ecological function. They do have the highest biodiversity value, meaning they are supporting more species than any other tree genus. They're sequestering more carbon dioxide, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, and then building their tissues out of carbon. But even more important, and is underappreciated, is that oaks, and actually all plants, are pumping extra carbon that they fix through photosynthesis into the soil through their root system. And that's, once it's in the soil, it's there for long-term storage, well, thousands. It's measured in thousands of years. So that's what we need to do, is get that carbon into the soil. They're the best soil stabilizers because they've got such big root systems. They make the best leaf litter, meaning it lasts the longest. And all of those things promote healthier watersheds. I started the book in October because that's when my wife said, you should write a book about oaks. So I said, okay. And it was October, and I looked out the window, and there's our oak. So what was happening in October? That, of course, is when you start to think about and recognize acorns. They're dropping maybe sometimes late September, but usually in October. And a single oak, particularly a large one, can make a lot of acorns, up to 3 million acorns in its lifetime. And each one of those acorns is a little package of very valuable food. It's high in fat, it's high in protein, and a lot of animals have grown dependent on those food packets from oaks, including a number of rodents. Big guys too. They not only do bears like to spend the winter in the hollows of big oak trees, but they also eat a lot of acorns. Of course, those squirrels do, and those cute little deer that we love so much. But turkeys are walking around the forest in the fall, eating as many acorns as they can. Red-bellied woodpeckers, titmice, towhees, believe it or not, nuthatches, flickers, they all eat a lot of acorns. And many ducks do too, particularly wood ducks. Any acorn that falls into the water, the wood duck dives down and gets it. And they'll also come up on the land and eat as many acorns as they can. Invertebrates eat acorns as well. This is the acorn weevil tunneling out of an acorn, and that's what it looks like after it comes out as an adult. Then there's a group of moths called acorn moths that do pretty much the same thing. The caterpillar develops inside the acorn. And when they come out, they look like this. It's a complex of species. There's several species, but they are all so similar that it's difficult to tell them apart visually. So you've got all these things eating acorns. And if you look under an oak tree, maybe 2 weeks after the acorns drop, it's total devastation. There aren't any viable acorns. They've all been removed or eaten or squashed or whatever. And you might wonder how oaks ever successfully reproduce. And this is where relationship with jays comes in. It's a very ancient mutualism that developed when both lineages evolved in Southeast Asia 65 million years ago. Oaks, of course, are providing those acorns that jays use for winter food. What do jays do for oaks? They allow oaks to move farther and faster than any other tree genus in the world. And this is how that works. Jays, of course, store acorns for winter food. They will take an acorn. They don't cache them, so they're not putting a bunch of acorns in one place. They will bury them singly. So they'll pick up an acorn, then they'll fly up to a mile before they actually bury that acorn. And that's what makes them differ from any other thing that is moving acorns around, because they move them much farther. Then they'll find typically an area that has been disturbed, so they can tap the acorn beneath the soil surface easily. Now, if they think another jay has watched them do that, they wait a few minutes and then they dig up their acorn and they move it, because jays know that jays steal acorns. And then, of course, during the wintertime, they're going to go back and find those acorns and have something to eat. Well, they can be very busy in the fall. A single jay can bury up to 4,500 acorns each fall, but they only remember where 1 out of every 4 of those acorns is, which means a single jay can plant 3,360 oak trees each year. And if they do it up to a mile from the parent tree, that's what's allowing those trees to move farther and faster. It's not just blue jays that are doing this. We have, I don't know, 7 or 8 species of jays in North America. This is one of the scrub jays in Pacific Northwest, doing the same thing with acorns. Another bird, the acorn woodpecker, has a very specialized relationship with acorns. It's a beautiful bird in the Southwest, and they're doing the same thing in a different way. So they're storing acorns for winter use, but they don't store them underground. They put them in acorn trees. An acorn tree is a snag that they have adopted as a family unit, and they peck out little holes for the acorns. Here's one stuffed in there. They just stuff it in, and that's where the acorn sits all winter long, and then they go retrieve it when they need it. Well, acorn trees are really valuable pieces of real estate, and the family will defend them once they have one. There can be up to 50,000 holes drilled in an acorn tree, which they use year after year after year. They don't want to have to do that again every single year. So if you're lucky enough to have an acorn tree in your yard, it's enormously entertaining. Okay, November. November, you might think back and say, well, this was a great year for acorns, or it was a terrible year for acorns. And that's usually what you have, one or the other. You don't have too many in-between years for acorns. A great year for acorn is called a mast year. That's when the oaks are dropping a lot of acorns, and usually all members of a single taxonomic section, like the white oak group or the red oak group, will produce acorns at the same time during a mast year. And then other years produce very few acorns at all. So that's unusual type of reproduction for plants. So it needs to be explained. That's what plant ecologists do. They come up with hypotheses. There are 4 here that have attempted to explain masting in oak trees, and they're not mutually exclusive. They all could be contributing to masting at the same time. Predator satiation, predator reduction, improved pollination, and energy partitioning. Predator satiation, that's what an acorn weevil looks like outside the acorn. They can be really numerous. Up to 90% of the acorns on a tree can have acorn weevils in them. Same thing with the acorn moths. And then, of course, you have the white-footed mice and other rodents, and all of those things that eat acorns want to eat as many acorns as they can. So if the oak produced the same number of acorns every year, the populations of those acorn eaters would stabilize around that number, and they really would eat just about every single one. But if oaks are really variable in how they produce acorns, they can satiate the predator population. So if one year you make a whole lot of acorns, a mast year, then the population of acorn weevils and acorn moths and all those guys will explode. And then the next year you make very few or no acorns, then those populations crash. There's a lot of starvation going on. The squirrel populations crash, the mouse populations crash. Predator reduction. And then usually you go 2 or 3, sometimes 5 years without any acorns or very few acorns. Then they'll have another mast year. And there aren't nearly enough acorn eaters around to be able to handle all those acorns. And that helps oaks actually reproduce. Improved pollination. Oaks are wind pollinated, which is a game of chance. This is the male catkin. It simply releases pollen on the air. And that pollen has to find another oak tree. Every oak tree does have male and female flowers on the same tree, but they're not synchronized. The male flowers release pollen first, and then the female flowers open up. So you've got to have more than one individual of the species nearby, and the pollen has to float. And if you've got a lot of individuals releasing a lot of pollen at the same time in a mast year, the chances of successful pollination increase. Then finally, energy allocation. By the way, if you're wondering whether oaks can have good fall color, they can. This is a scarlet oak, probably our prettiest oak. But energy allocation, there's never enough energy to go around. So oaks divide it up. In some years, they use it for growth, and other years they use it for reproduction, but they almost never do both at the same time. I mean, they'll grow a little bit each year, but energy allocation is another explanation for oak masting. So again, these are not mutually exclusive hypotheses. They all could be operating at the same time. All right, December is when you might recognize another peculiar habit of oak trees, particularly in the white oak group, and that is they don't drop their leaves. This is a deciduous tree, but it hangs onto its leaves all winter long. That's a condition called Marcescence. And again, it needs to be explained because most deciduous trees do not do that. And the leading explanation is that it wasn't long ago, 9,000 years ago, that we had a lot of big mammals walking around the earth, particularly in the temperate zone. This was the group of large mammals that were present in Mexico alone. 3 species of mammoths, a giant sloth that could reach up 18 feet, camels and horses. No, I think there were 44 species of rhinoceros on planet Earth back then. And many of these guys were browsers, like a white-tailed deer. A browser is something that eats woody material over the winter time. It's not out there eating grass. They're snipping off the buds, the meristematic tissue that will produce leaves the following spring. That's where the nutrients are. So if oaks surround their buds with dead leaves from the previous year, it's hard to get a good mouthful of bud without a mouthful of very untasty leaves. And it's hard to do that without rustling those leaves, which of course attracts all those predators that want to eat those big mammals. The distribution of marcescent leaves supports that hypothesis because they only go up about 18 feet. After that, no more marcescence. And that, of course, is as high as that giant sloth could reach. Pretty tough to test that hypothesis these days, but it does make a nice story. It also provides oaks with a landscape attribute that most other deciduous trees don't have, and that is they can be screens, even in the wintertime. So if you don't like your neighbor, plant a white oak and you can screen him out all year long. Okay, January. Cold, we're not outside staring at our oak trees very much, but if we do, if you look up into the limbs of a large oak or even a small oak, you're likely to see some of the small birds that we know and love, like chickadees and titmice, flitting around the limbs there. They're not just having fun, particularly in the wintertime. They have very tight energy budgets. They cannot spend energy just for the fun of it. They're looking for food, which is puzzling because we know there's no food up there. These guys, of course, are seed eaters. They come to our feeders and 50% of their diet is seeds all winter long. We don't worry about them as long as we put the seed out. The other 50% is insects and spiders. Maybe that's what they're looking for. But again, we know there's no insects and spiders up here. So what are they doing that for? It's really puzzling when you have tiny little birds like the golden crowned kinglet, which does not eat seeds. 100% of its diet is invertebrates during the winter time, all the time. It's a bird that should have migrated with all the other insectivores that go south where the insects remain all winter long. But they don't. They stay up here. I took this pictures when it was snowing in my backyard. It's called the Kinglet Paradox. What are they doing up here when they shouldn't be? Well, it's puzzling, but it gives ecologists something to think about, which of course we need all the time. Bern Heinrich does not like paradoxes. He wants to explain them. He's a great naturalist. He's got a column in the Natural History magazine every month. So he looked in the crops of golden crowned kinglets in Maine in January, and he found they were full of caterpillars, like this guy, caterpillar, sitting on an oak branch in the middle of the winter, or this guy. They look just like sticks, which is why we don't really see them, but they're there. And that is what the kinglet and the other birds are looking for all winter. When it gets really cold, there are antifreeze proteins in the cells of these guys that keeps them from bursting. So they shrink a little bit when it gets cold, they swell a little bit when it gets warmer, but they just sit there. There's nothing to eat. But there's no more kinglet paradox. We know what the birds are doing up there. They're eating these caterpillars. What we don't know is what the caterpillars are doing up there. Most insects overwinter as eggs or as pupae or as chrysalids, or a few overwinter as adults. I saw a mourning cloak yesterday. That's one of the butterflies that overwinters as an adult. But these guys are overwintering as larvae. It's very unusual. Why are they doing that? Well, of course, in the springtime, those buds burst and we get new leaves. If you're there as a mature larva, you're going to have an advantage over anything else that's there. If you overwinter as an egg, those little guys will hatch out and they can't compete against those large caterpillars. If you overwinter as an adult, you've got to find a mate and then lay eggs, and then those eggs hatch. If you overwinter as a chrysalis, you've got to emerge as an adult and then mate. And so the caterpillars that are on these trees have a competitive advantage in that they've got an unlimited food supply in the early spring, and that might explain why they're there. Okay, February. This is biologically the quietest time of years for oaks, so it's a good time to talk about oak landscaping myths. There are a number of things that I hear all the time. I call them landscaping myths. You know, a myth used to be based a little bit on fact, and then it kind of gets blown out of proportion. Used to be. So we've got some myths today that have no fact to them at all. But there are some realities to these things, like, are oaks too expensive, or do they grow too slowly to use as landscape plants? Are they too big to use on small lots? Are they going to fall over and crush our house? Are they going to lift up our hardscape, our sidewalks, and our driveways? Well, fact or fiction? Let's look at each one of those. Are oaks too expensive to use as landscape plants? The answer is they can be, depending on whether you want instant gratification or not. If you insist on buying a large oak, you're going to pay a lot of money for it. You're also going to buy an oak with a very small root system. So we now know how to grow large trees in pots without them becoming root bound. That's a root bound plant, and that guy's going to die. So the roots are going to grow and strangle themselves. You never want to buy a plant that is root bound. But these with air pots, they're not root bound, but they do have a highly reduced amount of root material. So the only way they can support a tree this big is to rapidly grow as much root system as they can after you plant them. That can be hard, though. That can be hard. This is a planting of oaks that I ran into in Newark, Delaware. I think it was about 15 oaks. Every single one had died. That is a lot of money down the drain, and it went down the drain because they insisted on planting large trees. The other option is to have balled and burlap trees, where you essentially chop off all the roots and then wrap it up in burlap and plant that. Hard on the trees again. The key is, if I were to plant an acorn the same day I planted one of these trees that I could pay up to $3,000 for, this acorn is going to grow, put down that big root system, and if this tree survives, it will spend a decade rebuilding the root system before it grows substantially up top here. So you've got instant gratification, but then it just is kind of delayed. This guy is going to grow rapidly, and in that 10-year period, it will be taller and bigger and much healthier than those tall trees that you spend a lot of money on. And of course, the acorn was free. This is a terrible picture I took at a friend's house in Illinois this winter with my cell phone. It must not have been light enough. This is a black oak that they planted as a balled and burlap tree 40 years ago. So it's grown not all that much. There's a big split down the side here, so who knows if it's going to survive. This is a white oak that a blue jay or a squirrel planted just 10 years ago. So this guy has a 30-year head start on this one. This one has almost caught up to it, and it's a much healthier tree because it was allowed to develop its root system. This is an ideal size to plant your oak. It's hard to get them this size because, of course, nurserymen want to make a lot of money by selling you the big tree, but you can also plant them yourselves. Then you run into the next problem, though. Are oaks going to grow too slowly? I hear all the time that I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And of course, if you can only enjoy an oak when it's 400 years old, you're right. You're not going to live long enough. But do they really grow that slowly? Let's have a race between this is our white oak right here. It's 6 years old right here. And this is my little friend, Bella, who's 2 years old. She's not our daughter. She was our surrogate granddaughter for a while. We had her every day for a couple of years. And she really loved this oak. So let's have a race. I took a picture of Bella next to this oak tree every year on her birthday. So the oak is 6 years old here, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Bella's losing. 16, 17, 18, 19. And there's 2020. Bella had her mask on. She's clearly lost. The oak tree took off and never looked back. Bella is 5'10", almost 5'11". She's tall. She's taller than me, but she couldn't catch up with the oak. So do they grow that slowly? They grow slowly the first couple of years. And after that, they grow as fast as anything else. This is a white oak, remember. That's supposed to be a real slow grower. So I'm not going to put a whole lot of credence in that. And the important thing is if you're planting your oak for ecological value, it starts to deliver the very first year. Here's a pin oak that just popped its head above the leaves here. And here's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree, which means it's supporting bird food immediately. And that's a really important contribution to your landscape. Are oaks too large to use in small yards? I mean, you can drive around and see large trees in small yards all the time, which means in the old days, they didn't think so. There's a row of big red oaks as I approach the university in Newark, where the tree is practically the size of the little front yard here. And I'm sure they were planted the same time this house was built, more than 100 years ago. Remember, 100 years ago, there was no air conditioning. So this tree lowered the temperature of that house by 10 degrees every summer, a very valuable contribution back then. Hasn't fallen over and crushed the house, hasn't lifted up the hardscape. But you're not going to find anybody who recommends a tree this big in a space that small these days. This is a large oak next to a large church. Unfortunately, they did not cut it down when they built the church. So it can be done, but again, it's just not going to be recommended. Point is, there are small oaks that we can get into the landscape. Here is small species that are available in the east. Dwarf chestnut oak is the most common one, Quercus prinoides. Georgia oak it's actually an endangered species in Georgia because it has such narrow distribution, but it is in the trade once in a while, and it's a small little oak. Blue jack, blackjack oaks, those oaks that grow in some of our pine barrens are quite small. There's a dwarf live oak, Quercus virginiana minima. So it's the big spreading live oak with the Spanish moss hanging from it, comes in a dwarf variety. These yellow species here are small oaks in the West. The yellow species are just the species of small oaks that occur in Texas alone. So there are a lot of oak options out there, particularly if you live a little bit farther west. Many of them are not in the trade, but they could easily be. Here's the dwarf chestnut oak on my property. They produce acorns when they're 5 feet tall. And here's another option, Coppicing. So this is, I got this off the web. I'm not sure what it is. It looks probably like a red oak or maybe a Shumard oak. You let the tree grow until it's about 4 inches in diameter, 3 or 4 inches in diameter, then cut it off at the base and it will come back as a shrub. That's what coppicing is. The settlers used to coppice all the time. They used these small stems for lots of things. We don't coppice anymore, but it was a very common thing in the past. We could do it so that you get the value of oak vegetation in bush shape in small spaces. I'd love to see somebody actually do this and see what it looks like. But if we plant oaks near our houses, are they going to fall over and crush our houses? Well, you know, sometimes they do. And when they do, you hear about it on the news, because the news will only cover bad news. They won't tell you all the times they don't fall over and crush your house. And why do they fall over? A lot of the reason is because of the way we insist on planting, not just oaks, but all trees. We want all trees to be specimen trees. So we make sure they are isolated, which means they can't interlock their roots with any other tree, which stabilizes them. So when it gets windy and very wet, those trees topple over, the root system can't hold them. It does happen. But this is the way trees grow in the forest. I was taking a walk in the woods the other day, and I looked at the number of trees that are growing within 2 or 3 feet of each other. Those roots are locked together in a very strong matrix, extremely stable. Here's a stream cut near our house where the water has washed away the soil. 1, 2, 3, 4 trees totally interlocked with their root systems. They are not going to blow over. Now, a tornado will snap them off, but there's no landscaping trick that protects us from tornadoes. So instead of this, why not this? These are actually the two white oaks that we got acorns from when we first moved in. Nobody planted them. They planted themselves. That's a 3-foot distance right there. And the argument is, well, neither one is as spectacular as it would be if it were alone. Now that's true, but if we retrain our eyes to appreciate plantings as groves, little tree groves, maybe that's okay. Here's 3 red oaks in Northwest Connecticut called the Three Sisters. Extremely stable, locked in. And here's a planting at Mount Cuba. This is a big red oak in the back here. These are hemlocks. This is a planned landscape, but it doesn't look like it. Here's the big roadies down here and a little bit of hardscape. Of course, this has been here. I'm not sure, Mrs. Lamont DuPont Copeland moved in the 30s. So it could be that it's fairly old at this point, but these trees are acting like a little forest. If you've got a couple acres of lawn and you're wondering how you can reduce it, put one of these in. Your little tree groves do not have to be the same species, but you do have to plant them when they're small so they can interlock their roots as they're growing. It's habitat, it's beautiful, highly functional and stable. Are oaks going to lift up your hardscape? It depends on what you plant them over. If you plant them over bedrock, yes, the roots will go laterally and lift up anything. But if you plant them over nice deep soil, they won't. Here's a pin oak. It's the oak of the swamp. Its roots went right down under this street, no problem. 2 big red oaks at the University of Delaware. Look at the size of that tree next to the curb. No problem at all because there's enough space under there. Another problem is when you plant over agricultural pan. If you bought a farm that had been farmed for 200 years and the plow went down 15 inches and never deeper, it compacted the soil underneath that plow and it creates what we call a pan. It's very hard and the root system will travel along a pan too. So if you've got a pan under your property, break it up, get a ripper, pull it behind a tractor and break that up, and then your root systems will go deep and it won't lift up hardscape. Okay, March is when those leaves do finally start to fall. Right now is when the Marcescent leaves are starting to drop, creating the leaf litter under a tree, and that means we're going to talk about leaf litter. There's a lot of variation in oak leaves in terms of shape and size. This is a leaf from a live oak, quite small. This is juvenile red oak leaf, mature red oak leaf. So juvenile leaves are much larger than mature leaves. White oak, chestnut oak, shingle oak, willow oak, looks like a willow. The emery oak in the west looks like holly. Tremendous amount of variation. And a single oak tree, a large oak tree, can produce a lot of leaves, 700,000 leaves on a single tree. And if you line them up on a tennis court, that will cover 4 tennis courts worth of area. But this is, that's one of their jobs, is to fall out and create a blanket that covers the ground and maintains the moisture in the soil, which supports the very vital soil community. We don't appreciate our soil communities because they're under the ground and when they're tiny and we can't see them, but they are extremely important. And as soon as that soil dries out, it's exposed to hot sun or the wind that blows it away or the water that washes it away, you destroy the soil community and then you destroy all the plants that community supports. So a good layer of oak leaf litter protects the soil better than anything else because these leaves last up to 3 years before they totally break down, which means you never have bare soil. If you have leaf litter from maple trees or tulip trees or birch trees, those leaves break down. They don't even make it through the summer. So then you do end up with bare soil, and that's bare soil is a no-no. People worry that if you leave the leaves in a planting, the plants won't be able to get through. Well, this is a fern grove that came up. It's all natural. That's the oak right there, dropped all these leaves. Nobody's manipulating it, but these guys have no trouble getting through. So our plants are much better at getting through leaf litter than we give them credit for. Now, if you pile up your leaves 3 or 4 feet deep under your tree, nothing's going to get through that. That's true. So it's got to be a normal layer of leaf litter. And you have to be careful. Sometimes if you got like the back of our house, the wind blows the trees right again, or the leaves against it, and it does pile up quite deep. So I have to rake those away. But normally we don't have to rake as much as we think we do. We like those leaves because they protect more species that are underground than above ground. In a single square meter of oak leaf litter, there are 250,000 mites. There are 100,000 springtails, columbolans, This is a little Sminthurid columbilum. 90,000 proturans. Those are primitive insects. Practically need a microscope to see them. 1 million nematodes and countless other things. All the bacteria and fungi, all the fungal relationships, the metarrhizae and everything else that exchange nutrients with roots. All of that is happening in the soil, and it's not going to happen unless you have that high moisture level. There are beautiful butterflies that depend on oak leaf litter, like the banded hair streak. Its caterpillars eat this stuff. Very hard to find those caterpillars because they look just like the leaves, but they're down there. It's a fairly common butterfly. There are a lot of moths. They're called litter moths, up to 70 species of litter moths, like the ambiguous litter moth or the American idea or the dark spotted palthus or 67 other species. When you see a towhee or a white-throated sparrow or several other birds in your yard, jumping backwards, it looks like they're pushing the leaves back with their feet. That's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to expose the ground so they can find all those things to eat, particularly these moths and their caterpillars. And when we rake all that stuff away, we're throwing away an entire ecosystem. We're also throwing away the leaves that contain the nutrients that tree used the previous year. And if you do that year after year after year, you do starve your oak and it doesn't live as long. And then, of course, you have all the predators, the ground beetles and the spiders and the centipedes and everything else that are there to eat all of the things under your oak tree. It's a thriving community only if you leave your leaf litter. April is when those buds we talked about actually burst forth. And it's a time you have a chance to see one of the most ephemeral biological interactions in all of nature. Lasts about 5 minutes a year. But you can see it if you're lucky. Go out and look at your buds, oak buds, on the right day of April. And that's when the synipid gall wasps lay their eggs in the bud and actually start the production of a gall. So here's a female gall wasp. There's her ovipositor right there. She's injecting an egg into this bud. This is a male who is riding her. Now he's already mated with her, but after she lays this egg, she's going to go to another bud and lay another egg. And he wants to be the guy that mates with her so that she uses his sperm to fertilize that egg. This is a male that wishes he was this male. So here she is, she's injecting an egg into this bud. Buds are made up of essentially stem cells. They can go in any direction depending on the chemicals they were bathed with. So the synipid is injecting plant hormones along with her egg. And of course, the oak has plant hormones, and the resulting gall is a compromise between both of those forces. Here's a female gall wasp, which is laying an egg. She did it in my oaks last year. I tagged it so I could see what developed, and that is the gall that developed from that particular oviposition event. There are 5,000 species of synipid gallers in the world, so it's very hard to find an oak that does not have one or more galls on it. A single tree can support 70 species of gallers. That's a lot. And many of these galls are hollow. This is the apple oak gall or the oak apple gall. You can see it written both ways. If you cut it open, the galler, the little larva guy, is in the middle here in a cylinder. And then you got a bunch of air and then the outside of the gall. And it's curious, what is all this air for? It seems like wasted energy to make a gall that big when the guy's only way down here. Well, it turns out that synipid gall wasps have more natural enemies in the form of parasitoids, other wasps that lay their eggs in the larvae of the synipids, like this pterimid right here, very long ovipositor. So the distance between the wasp and the galler has got to be bigger than the length of this ovipositor. Otherwise, she can reach it and lay an egg in it. And there's a period when the gall is expanding very quickly where she can reach it and lay an egg in it, but otherwise, that big hollow space in the gall protects the galler from the ovipositors of all of these parasitoids. This is another pterimid in California, Pterimus californicus, which has the longest ovipositor, and it has led to the creation of the largest gall that we have in North America on Gary oak, Quercus, or the Oregon oak, Quercus garryana. The larva is way back in the middle there, and the distance between the outside of the gall and the galler has got to be bigger than that very long ovipositor. Otherwise, the pterimid can reach it. There's a lot of variation in galls. Some of them look like plant diseases. A lot of people think they are diseases when actually they're not. There are 536 species of plant galls west of the Rockies, and most of those are cynipid galls on oaks. Some grow on the leaves, some grow on the stems, some look like candy, some look like that. Some do look like plant diseases. Some look like spindles, some look like that again. More candy. The prettiest galls are in the west. So if you really want to appreciate galls, go to the west. Oh, this one's in my yard, looks like pottery. Here's the cutest one. That's the little gnome gall. This is another one in my yard, looks like a brain. Very curious one here. This is a single oak leaf. There are 4 galls on that oak leaf, and look at the number of gallers that came out of each gall. Hundreds of gallers produced by a single leaf here. And galls have a very interesting role, have played a very interesting role in the recorded history of humans. If you grind up a gall like this, that hole, by the way, is where the galler came out, and combine it with certain chemicals, it forms an indelible black ink. And that is the ink that our recorded history was recorded with. So for example, the Bible was written with gall ink, and the Magna Carta was written with gall ink, and the Declaration of Independence was written with gall ink. All the scribes and monks during the Middle Ages wrote with gall ink. So galls have played a really important role in our history that is totally unappreciated. May is when those leaves fully expand and you really get the biological year underway. And of course, along with the expansion of leaves all over the temperate zone comes the caterpillars that eat those leaves. And following the caterpillars that eat those leaves are the birds that eat those caterpillars. That forms a complete loop, by the way, so you don't end up with too much of anything. I'm talking about spring migration here. And birders, of course, love spring migration. You got all these beautiful warblers coming up. What are there? 326 species of neotropical migrants, something like that in the US that come up from the tropics. And they're always going to stop at oak trees. Birders know that warblers in particular are going to be found in oak trees because that's where the food is. I had a student, Christy Beal, several years ago, look at the amount of time that warblers were foraging in different types of trees. These are tree families here. The first one is Fagaceae. That's where the oaks are. Also the beeches and the chestnuts. But she was looking at big trees and cemeteries, and there were no beeches and chestnuts. So this is all oaks here. The birds spent most of their time in oaks, a little bit in pines, a little bit in birches and so on, but very little time in these other trees because there's very little food there. What's the food I'm talking about? It's the caterpillars that support these birds when they're migrating. Remember, in the spring, there are no berries. The birds get here way before the plants make berries and way before they make this year's worth of seeds. So they're looking for these caterpillars. Things like this purple-crested slug, the buck moth, the white-marked tussock moth, the saddle prominent, double-line prominent, white-dotted prominent, the checkered fringe prominent, the laugher, the lace-cap caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the skiff moth, the white blotch heterocampa, oblique heterocampa, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the banded tussock moth, the red line panapoda, the yellow neck caterpillar, the smaller parasa, the unicorn caterpillar, the crown slug. They're called slug caterpillars because their heads are tucked underneath, not because they're slugs. The streaked dagger moth, the epilated dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the red humped oak worm, the orange humped oak worm, the pink striped oak worm, the confused wood grain, the spiny oak slug, and the spun glass caterpillar, which is my favorite. And then literally hundreds more species, particularly of moths, are found on the oaks, not just in this region that supports 557 species of oaks, but nationwide that supports 952 species of, did I say oaks, of caterpillars. Now remember, caterpillars are the most important insects eating plants because they're transferring more energy to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So when we discovered that, I started taking pictures of all the species of caterpillars that are now making a living at our house. And I'm up to 1,140 species, 30% of which use oaks. And they wouldn't be there if I hadn't put the oaks in my yard. And that's why I call oaks keystone species. Remember what a keystone is? This is the Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. And if you take the stone out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they are making most of the food. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. Why do we need so many caterpillars? Well, the birds certainly need them and many other things too, but we'll talk about birds. I'm sure you've seen the chickadee statistic before. Chickadees are typical birds. They're all eating a lot of caterpillars, thousands of caterpillars to get one nest of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest, where they fledge. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars, depending on the number of chicks in the nest. And after they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. So you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of a bird that is 1/3 of an ounce. Your crepe myrtle isn't making any caterpillars. Your burning bush isn't making any caterpillars. Your ginkgo isn't making any caterpillars, but your oak's making thousands of caterpillars. And that's why we need these plants in our landscapes. June, of course, this year was cicada month, and you all got to enjoy the cicadas. I got to enjoy the cicadas. What am I? I'm 70 this year, and the next time the periodical cicadas come out at our house, I will be 87. So we'll see whether I get to enjoy them or not, but I made sure I did this year. Periodical cicada, 2 broods, 17 and 13-year brood. In a few places they overlap, but typically not. And this is what the periodical cicada looks like, comes out in the spring, and where the annual cicada comes out in the middle of the summer, and it's green rather than orange. Of course, the media knew that the cicadas were coming, so they like to vilify nature. It was going to be a terrible scourge. You're going to have to move because they'll be so terrible. They're going to be so loud that mothers will kill their babies and go crazy. It's an invasion. All kinds of things we heard on the news media. It's none of those things. It was one of the most fantastic biological events you'll ever be privileged to witness. And again, I did get to witness. This is what it looked like at the University of Delaware. Good year for cicadas. Big oak back here. When they come out of the ground, of course, they aerate it. You don't have to pay anybody to do this. They have tunneled up from the root system of your trees, and that allows oxygen and water to get down to those roots. It's a very valuable service, free. But there were a lot. There were so many that this year, 11 Mississippi kites flew up from who knows where and spent 2 weeks in Newark, Delaware, eating our cicadas. The birders loved it. They all came to see the Mississippi kites. So here's a typical life cycle. The nymph will crawl out of the ground at night and hang from vegetation, then split its skin. The adult hangs down and then swings up and grabs the head here and then hangs. This is called an exuvie. It's like a soft shell crab right now, extremely vulnerable. So this happens at night when other things that want to eat cicadas can't see it. So it hangs there until it hardens up, when it can fly away and start its adult life. So if this guy's a male, and he is a male, he's got structures in his thorax called tympanum that click. So picture a Coke can. If you click it, click, 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 they can click their tympanum like something like 400 times a second. And it's so fast, it makes a buzz. And that's the noise that you hear. It's a species-specific noise. In the 17-year brood, there are actually 3 different species that all come out together. Why are they making noise? Well, they're trying to attract females, and the females want to mate with the best male. So they mate with the loudest male because it takes a large, healthy male to make a loud sound. So they're looking for the best genes, and that's how they judge male quality. So this female said, okay, this guy qualifies. She's going to mate with him. Now it's her turn to lay the eggs. So she's got her ovipositor here. She jams them into twigs. This is a pin oak twig in my front yard. This is hard to do. Get a pin and try to stick it into a pin oak branch. You're going to bend the pin, but she manages to do it. That's her ovipositor. She jams it all the way in there, then lays an egg. Then she moves right down, 6 or 7 eggs in a row. Then she'll go to a different stem and do it again. From the point where she lays her eggs on out, it typically kills the branch. That's called flagging. And the little guys drop they hatch about a month and a half later, then they drop to the soil, tunnel underground, and start to suck on the xylem of plant roots. I will report, though, that that pin oak that I just showed you, there was no flagging. I'd had a lot of oviposition on it, but none of them actually killed the branches. I'm not sure why that was. But usually it does flag, and people get upset. Oh, the cicadas are going to kill my trees. They're not going to kill your trees. They're just going to prune them once every 17 years, and that's okay. So once underground, the little guys are sucking on xylem, which is practically water. There's very few nutrients in xylem, and you can have up to 50,000 nymphs on a single oak tree brand or root system without any measurable damage at all. I had a student look at the preference for oviposition by counting flagging in Newark, Delaware. The green bars are species of oaks. So yes, they laid on a lot of species, but they preferred to lay on oaks. And then they die. And that's it. It takes about 3 weeks. So it's fun, but then it's over. Why do they spend 17 years underground? Well, it's probably predator satiation again. Cicadas are good to eat. A lot of things eat them, like our friend the squirrel here. But there is no predator population that can specialize on these cicadas and wait 17 years before they get to eat again. So the cicadas come out in huge numbers and swamp the predator population so that many of them actually get to reproduce. Okay, July. This is when the night chorus begins. And by night chorus, I'm talking about katydids. This is a male katydid. The top part of their forewings is sclerotized, and they lift up their wings and rub them back and forth against each other. There's a scraper and a file there, and it makes a species-specific little chirping sound. I did a lot of camping in North Jersey when I was young, and katydids sang me to sleep on many, many nights. It's one of my favorite sounds. Why are these guys singing? Well, this is why. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Katy who fell in love with a handsome young man. Alas, he did not share her feelings, and he married another. Soon thereafter, he and his young bride were found poisoned in their bed. Who perpetrated the crime has never been determined, but some say the insects in the trees were watching that night, and each summer they solved the mystery by singing katydid, katydid. That's a single male singing. When you get a bunch of them singing, it does make a night chorus. There are 4 species of katydids that frequent oak forests. This is what a female looks like just before she matures. Her wings aren't developed yet. There's her ovipositor, the structure that lays eggs. And here she is with her wings fully developed. Why are those males singing so loudly? Well, it's the same reason. The females are looking for the loudest male. They want the best male, and they measure male quality by how loud he sings. When they lay their eggs, they glue them to twigs. These are large flat eggs, and people find them, wonder what they are. These guys have already hatched, but they are katydid eggs. So the katydids start singing usually mid-July around here, and they'll sing through July, through August. And depending on when we get the first killing frost, they start to peter out in September, but some go even into October, and once in a while, November. But speaking of August, this is a time when the oak leaves are the toughest. Oak leaves start to get tougher from as soon as they expand in the spring. They add tannins and lignins to the tissue, and they become like little thin boards, which are tough for caterpillars to eat. But caterpillars have figured out how to do it anyway. They feed gregariously. This is the yellow neck caterpillar. They're all eating together. They can get around that leaf toughness. Here they are as older larvae, eating a lot of material. This is the orange humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm. So many of the caterpillars eating oaks will feed gregariously to get around that really tough tissue. I walked around our tree here. This is in 2014, and I counted the caterpillars just on the lower branches. On July 24th, 2014, I got 410 caterpillars just down there. 115 of them were yellow neck caterpillars, which are the largest. And then I stood back and took this picture so that I could ask you, do you see any of those caterpillars? No, you don't. Do you see any of the caterpillar damage? No, you don't. But this is the distance at which we typically view our trees. But if I knocked on your door and said, you got 410 caterpillars on your oak tree, most people would panic. Get the spray can, call the man, save the tree. The tree is good at passing on its energy. And if it didn't pass on its energy to caterpillars, you wouldn't have any of the birds that we love and all the other things that eat insects in our yards. So please allow the insects to eat your trees. That's what the trees are there for. I met a woman, Tammany Baumgarten, in New Orleans several years ago, and she suggests that we all practice the 10-step program. Take 10 steps back from your trees and all your insect problems disappear. Excellent advice. Another way to get around leaf toughness is to become a leaf miner. You eat the area only in between the tough parts, the upper and lower epidermis. You eat the palisade mesophyll and the parenchymal cells. That's where the nutrients are, but you have to be really thin, really skinny to do that. So the two kinds of mines that caterpillars make, a serpentine mine looks like a snake. Egg was laid here and the little guy started mining. The dark line is his poops, his frass. And then he finally pupated here. So it doesn't eat very much leaf material, but he mined in between the tough parts and was able to do that in August. This is a blotch miner. Here's the caterpillar right there. Here it is backlit. And that's what it looks like when it's out of the leaf. Doesn't look much like a caterpillar because it's got so many specialized adaptations for being a leaf miner. But it does look like a moth when it comes out. It's tiny, but these guys are fairly common. One of the Chamaemeria species on oaks, the solitary oak leaf miner, the gregarious oak leaf miner, the oak tentiform leaf miner. A lot of species get around oak leaf toughness by leaf mining. Well, wait a minute. Okay, September, this is our last month. This is when you recognize crickets starting to sing at night. And of course, if one of those black crickets gets in your house and sings, that's good luck. Well, there are also crickets that are up in trees and shrubs called bush and tree crickets, and they're not black. They're usually yellow or green, sometimes brown. But they're doing the same thing as the cicadas and the katydids. The males are singing, trying to attract females, but these guys are smart. Here's a male, and he wants to be the loudest male, or at least he wants to make the female think he's the loudest male. So he finds a hole, or he chews a hole of the appropriate size, and he puts his head through it, raises his wings, does his little chirping sound. Now, most leaves have a slight parabolic shape, and they project the sound farther and louder than if he were singing on a flat surface. So he's sending a false message to the female. I'm better than I am in reality. Can you believe it? A male sending a false message to a female? Well, he does that. But you know what? It might not be such a false message because he might not be the loudest male, but he may be the smartest male. And the female comes and mates with him, and it's great. September is also the time that you are likely to see walking sticks. Hardly ever very common. There's a couple of records of defoliation in West Virginia from walking sticks, but I've never seen that. Usually if you see one or two a year, you're lucky. They're called walking sticks because they look like sticks and they walk. It's one of the orthopteroids. And they have an interesting way of reproducing. They just walk around in the canopy. This guy's on an emery oak in Arizona. They walk around the canopy and the females just drop their eggs to the forest floor. And those eggs will either sit there and hatch that year, or they will hatch the next year, or they hatch the next year. So whether the female can drop eggs that will hatch asynchronously. It's called bet hedging, because she doesn't know what the conditions are going to be like each year. And if they're terrible one year, the eggs that hatch the following year might make it. Well, of course, in our woods, we've got a number of spring ephemerals. This is bloodroot that makes these pods. And this is typical of spring ephemerals. Those pods contain seeds. They burst open, and those seeds have little white structures on them called eliosomes. And those eliosomes are really attractive to ants. The ants come, they want to eat the eliosome, but first they'll carry this back to the nest. They eat the eliosome, they realize they can't eat the seed, so they throw it in the garbage dump of the ant nest, which is about 1 inch below the surface of the soil, a perfect place for those bloodroots to germinate. Well, walking stick eggs look a lot like the seeds of spring ephemerals, and they've got a white thing here, which might look like an eliosome. Whatever, the ants do the same thing. They pick them up, take them back to the nest, realize, oh, we can't eat them. So they put them in the garbage dump, and that's a perfect, very safe place for all of these walking sticks to develop. All right, we've rushed through the year. There's many more things happening on our oaks than we have time to talk about. So let's end up, believe it or not, we're going to end up on a high note here, but first we have to talk about some problems we've created, like the biodiversity crisis. We've got two major crises on planet Earth. We've got climate change, and we've got the biodiversity crisis. Climate change is getting a lot of attention these days. That's good, needs to get attention. Biodiversity crisis is not getting nearly enough attention. And they're often linked. Oh, we've got a biodiversity crisis because of climate change. We would have a biodiversity crisis even if there was no climate change because we humans have not shared the planet with other living things. We've lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. We've got global insect decline. And we always say, well, these things are disappearing. They're not disappearing, we're killing them. I mean, there's no mystery to it. We are killing the life around us. And that's why we're now in the 6th great extinction event that the Earth has ever experienced. But it's the first one that's ever been caused by another species. It's a global crisis. The good news is it's got a grassroots solution. Grassroots, you and I can solve this. Believe it or not, we really can. It means by grassroots, we all have to be involved in conservation, but we can. There are 4 things every single landscape needs to do these days in order to turn this around. We do need to capture carbon. We've got to pull that extra carbon out of the atmosphere. A third of the carbon that's in the atmosphere right now has come not from fossil fuels, but from the plants that we have removed from the planet, mostly our forests. If we planted the forests again, we could pull a third of the carbon out of the atmosphere. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it exists. Every landscape has to support a diverse community of pollinators, not because they pollinate our crops, because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants, including our crops. But believe me, there are other important plants on this planet. And finally, every landscape has to support a complex food web. It's got to use plants that pass on their energy. Otherwise, you don't have functional ecosystems. When you plant an oak, you are addressing 3 of those 4 ecological goals. You're capturing more carbon, you're managing the watershed better with those huge root systems, you're supporting a more complex food web. The only thing you're not doing better than many other plants is supporting pollinators because oaks are wind pollinated. But 3 out of 4 is pretty good. Despite these wonderful landscape attributes, though, oaks are in trouble. The old giants are gone. We've cut them down. The percentage of oaks in our eastern forest has been cut in half in the last century because we've suppressed fire management. That's what the Native Americans did so successfully. We've also introduced a number of problems, gypsy moth, a number of insect pests, but diseases as well. Oak wilt, bacterial leaf scorch, taking a heavy toll. Habitat fragmentation has reduced pollination success because our oaks are so separated from each other now. And for all those reasons, 28 of the 91 North American oak species are now threatened. A third of the global oaks are endangered. The Oregon white oak has lost 97% of its range. It used to go from the middle of California all the way up through Washington, 97% gone. There are 2,300 species that rely on oaks in Great Britain that are threatened because of the loss of oaks. And we humans live our lives out in a very brief instant of ecological time, and we can't return those giants to the forest in that time period, but we can start the process. And in no time at all, the oaks that we plant today will be big enough to assume many of their keystone roles in our landscapes. Everybody in the planet is responsible for good earth stewardship because everybody requires good earth stewardship. And the best way to exercise that responsibility is to embrace the power of oaks. So for the sake of turkeys, of chickadees, of woodpeckers, of warblers, of jays, of thrushes, of emeralds, of notodontids, of gallers, of weevils, of orthopteroids, of us, for our own sake, plant an oak, plant a living community, plant the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Doug. That was awesome. That's a lot of information. Thank you so much. I like when you get in those roles of just saying all the names of the different caterpillars. I love it. Some of them have crazy names.
They do. They do.
Yeah. Wonderful. So I'm going to start asking some of these questions. And I just want to say in advance to everyone, thank you so much first for joining us tonight. And second for being, awesome enough to ask questions of Doug. We will do our best to get to as many as we can tonight. Okay. So this question says, if you already have a red oak in your yard and you have space for another canopy tree, would you suggest another oak or maybe a black cherry or maybe another tree entirely?
That's a really good question. And it depends on the context of where your yard is. You do want those plants to be able to reproduce. So if your red oak is the only red oak within 100 yards, it's not going to be able to do that. So I would add another red oak so that it can exchange pollen and reproduce. But if you've got a red oak right down the street and you can get successful pollination, then adding a different species would be valuable as well. It could be a different oak, it could be a black cherry, could be a lot of things. So diversity is good, but you want enough individuals so you can actually get reproduction.
Okay, great. Someone has a question about an invasive maple, Norway maple, and is just asking, is there any wildlife value to Norway maples?
Not much, not much. It throws really heavy shade so that very few things can grow under it. It is invasive. You know, those seeds, because they throw heavy shade, they do block out the natives when they invade a forest. We did an experiment in comparing the use of native and non-native maples by insects, and caterpillar use is reduced 68%. So it's not eliminated, but it is seriously reduced. Norway maples are different from other maples in that if you pick off the petiole, you'll see a little bit of white latex sap come out. Our maples don't do that. So our maple feeders are not adapted to dealing with that. And that's the main thing that discourages them. So yeah, not great value. It's a pretty landscape plant, no doubt. It used to be one of the most common plants in the country, street trees. They get huge, expensive to take down. So I certainly wouldn't plant one.
Okay. This next person's in Central Virginia, and it sounds like they are observing oak blight, and they like to plant oaks whenever possible, but are there types of oaks that are oak blight resistant or more resistant to disease or fungal issues?
Yes and no. So we've got, at my house, I got bacterial leaf scorch. A little farther west here, we do have oak blight. So maybe you have oak blight down there, maybe you got bacterial leaf scorch. The red oak group seems to suffer more from the bacterial leaf scorch than the white oak group does. Oak wilt attacks both groups, but sometimes the white oak group more. So I hear different people in different parts of the country complaining about different diseases. So yeah, attempt to avoid it, but don't stop planting oaks, please, because this is how we're going to get past these diseases. We're going to get resistant genotypes into the landscape. I've got bacterial leaf scorch on my property. It has already killed 2 black oaks and a red oak, but I've got several that look great. And those are going to be the resistant ones. Those will be the acorns that the jays disperse, and the susceptible genotypes are going to be eliminated. That's true for all of our plant diseases. So the response of don't plant them, they're going to get sick. In terms of the future generation, that's the exact wrong response, because we're not going to discover the resistant genotypes if we stop planting them. Most of them will get sick. It's true. Then we cut them down and we do it again until we get the resistant ones.
Okay, awesome. So talking a little bit about, I guess, trees with some issues. Someone says that they're a new ISA certified arborist filling out their first batch of tree risk assessments. Do you have any help for this person where they might be able to find species failure profiles for mid-Atlantic natives? They're having some trouble. If you've ever come across that.
No, I don't know of anybody who's got those numbers, those data. Maybe they exist, but it's beyond my experience. So I'm sorry, I can't help with that.
Okay, it was worth a shot. Someone asked, would oaks be included amongst the hyper accumulators?
You mean like hyper productive? They are the best keystone plant in the country, if that's what you mean. We can call them contributors or non-contributors, and oaks are contributing more than anything else. So they certainly would be among them. They would lead them in 84% of the counties in which they occur. Absolutely.
Okay. I must be honest, I did not know what the term hyperaccumulator was. So I did look it up quick, and it seems like maybe it's absorption of heavy metals. Do you know much about that with oaks?
Okay. Yeah, boy, remember, I'm an entomologist, guys, here.
No, I know.
I don't know about I don't know about their ability to use in remediation and pulling
right
nasties out of the ground. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry, maybe I'd love to find out if they're really good at that, then I can put that down as another attribute, but I don't know.
There we go. Someone wanted a little more clarification. When you say you want another oak of the same species close by for pollination, what is the maximum distance?
It's the distance that wind will carry that pollen. I don't know exactly how far they pollinate it. I can tell you, I've got a shingle oak in my yard. There are no shingle oaks around in the neighborhood, and it has never made a single viable acorn. It's not blowing miles. I think, maybe you'll get successful pollination 100 yards away. Somebody please ask me a question I can answer. This is.
We're trying, Doug. We're trying here.
The pollen has got to move on the wind, and that's just not infinite.
Okay. Are you okay with some more tree questions? Because that's what's coming in. So someone has a question about Marcescence, which is such a fun word. Do you have any insight in how the tree knows? When you were talking about how, 18 feet up and then it stops, it actually does not hold on to its leaves. How does the tree know, which branches are the lowest to retain that? Is that like a chemical?
Oh boy.
We're getting you in trouble tonight, huh?
This is natural selection at its best.
Okay.
So whatever the mechanism, Marcescence is an exception. Most deciduous trees drop their leaves. So if it really was those mammals selecting for holding on to your leaves, the trees that held on to their leaves within the first 18 feet were the ones that survived and passed on their genes better than other ones. There was no selection to hold on to your leaves higher up. How they know? It's probably the same way that cicadas know to come out the same week after 17 years underground. I have no idea how they know. Right. Nature's pretty wonderful. That's how they know.
Here we go. Here's a tent caterpillar question. You ready? Yeah. What do you advise people to do when they have tent caterpillar nests in their trees?
Ignore them. The reason we don't there's two reasons. They're webby, so it reminds us of spiders, and people don't like that. And particularly in black cherries, or if you've got an apple tree or something, they can defoliate. If you get 2 or 3 females that laid their eggs gregariously on one tree, they can defoliate it. I'll tell you, I had a black cherry. I still have it in my backyard. It seeded itself in next to my back porch. I always knew I had to move it because it's too close. I had a tent caterpillar population defoliate that tree 10 years in a row. It didn't even slow it down. A month later, all the leaves are back and it kept going. So we get more upset over defoliation than we need to, particularly with those prunus species. They're really good at handling that. Tent caterpillars are cyclic. So your populations go up, then they go down again, and they go up. There are a number of natural enemies of tent caterpillars, and many of them are other insects. So one of the things that's causing problems with insect herbivores is mosquito fogging that kills all the natural enemies. Try to curb your mosquito fogging and let the natural enemies control things naturally. We'll still have tent caterpillars outbreaking, but you can remove the tent, or you can just slice it open, and then those natural enemies can get in there really easily. That is what yellow-bill and black-bill cuckoos, 2 bird species, depend on. They follow around tent caterpillar populations in the spring. I had 100 tent caterpillar nests on my property 2 years ago, and then I got a cuckoo came by, and he sliced open and ate every single one of those tents, and I had no successful reproduction of tent caterpillars. A single bird did that. So they're really effective. We just don't have enough cuckoos around. But it's one of these natural phenomena that I would ignore. We got many other things we should be worrying about.
There's a few questions that came in. I'm assuming these are because of your slides that you talk about all of the wonderful leaf mulch and leaves falling in the forest floor and all the magic that's happening in there. Maybe you can talk a little bit about mowing oak leaves to use as mulch in the garden. Is there a better time of year than not to do that based off of kind of the cyclical nature of who's using the leaves in the forest floor?
Yeah. The worst thing you can do is rake those leaves away or burn them. The next worst thing you can do is chop them up in your mower, because those leaves contain a lot of cocoons. I've got other pictures of moth cocoons that are in those leaves. And if you run them through a mower, you've just killed all that stuff. It also shortens the lifespan of that leaf mulch. One of the attributes of oak leaf mulch is that it lasts a long time, and the ground is always covered. But if you chop it up into little 1/4-inch pieces, it doesn't last three years. So you've really reduced its effectiveness. But at least you're not removing the nutrients that tree used, and the detritivores in your ground, your soil community will still recycle that. So that's good. The best thing is to let them be as full oak leaves. Now, I recognize that we can't leave them on our lawn, but I'm also encouraging us to have less lawn. My son bought a house a couple years ago, and he called me up the first fall and he said, "Dad, I've got too many leaves. What should I do with them?" And I said, "Rake them into your flower beds." And he said, "I don't have enough flower beds." And I said, "Exactly. Reduce the amount of lawn by putting more beds in your yard and put them under your trees." One thing I didn't talk about is we want to make safe landing sites for the caterpillars that develop on your oaks and then drop to the ground and pupate underground. So the best way to create a new bed under your oak tree is to leave the leaves under the tree and then plant right through it. The leaves will smother the grass, and you can, the best mulch is living mulch. Have a ground cover, have wild ginger or a Virginia creeper or ferns or mayapple or foam flower. There's so many things you can have there with the leaf litter underneath that. Then you've got a layered landscape that will support an awful lot of life, but only if you keep that leaf litter around.
We talked a little bit about disease with, you were mentioning like bacterial leaf scorch and all that good stuff. What might be some good resources for people? Because there are a lot of questions coming in about different diseases that might be inflicting their oaks. Do you have any resources for people, specific oak diseases, or just kind of like cooperative extension?
Yeah, I would contact
research.
I would contact the pathologist at your local university. That's their job, is to pass on. One thing I can say that oak wilt has been demonstrated to transfer from tree to tree through root grafts. So that's one reason not to plant your oaks close together, because they can transfer diseases that way. But the other reason is to do it so they don't fall over on your house. But these diseases are not good. If you've got a susceptible tree in your yard, you're going to be battling it the rest of your life. So it's better to get the resistant varieties in there. Let your tree do the best it can. If it can't handle it, replace it. You can spend a lot of money trying to kill these diseases and protect them. Now, again, I am not a plant pathologist, but I've never seen it really work. So.
This one kind of looks like one of those jokes where like the three guys walk into the bar. If there's an oak, a tree of heaven, and a red mulberry, all within about 10 feet, should the other two trees be allowed to stay around that oak?
Why wouldn't you just, because they're too close to the oak? I would get rid of the ailanthus, period. Mm-hmm. Tree of heaven, because it doesn't belong there. It's invasive, and it supports the spotted lanternfly, which you don't want. My guess is you do not have a red mulberry. You have a white mulberry. I have heard from reliable sources that through integration, they have hybridized over the years, and you have to go to Texas now to find true red mulberry. I wouldn't. Yes, I would make them. I would let them stay. I wouldn't. There you got your interlocked roots there. I mean, yes,
right. They're helping for
but definitely get rid of the ailanthus. Get rid of the ailanthus.
Yeah. A question came in about non-native oaks. Do they have any ecological value compared to the native oaks for our local fauna?
The Quercus sagittarius is sawtooth oak from China. That one's aggressively invasive. So it moves around and replaces, it does everything that the invasive species do. I would never plant that. And no, it's not as valuable. Does it have any value? I'm sure something eats it, but remember that 68% reduction in insect use. We have 91 species of native oaks. There's absolutely no reason why we need to start planting Chinese oaks. Now, Quercus robar, English oak, is planted ornamentally. That's not invasive. It's a white oak group member. It's not going to support as much, but it'll support some things. I don't have anything against Quercus robar. It's certainly not on the verge of replacing anything, but you can find entire forests of Quercus sagittarius now. So that's a problematic one that I definitely would avoid.
Okay. There's a couple questions in here about either growing from acorns or buying more oaks. So this one has to do with the slide that you had up that said, if you can buy an oak at this stage, that would be perfect. Can you speak to at all, like how approximately maybe how old that tree was? Or, I guess maybe it depends on what type of oak, how big they get at,
right.
at that stage.
That actually looked like a Quercus garryana oak, and it was 2 years old. You could tell there's 2 growth periods, not very big at 2 years. I don't know the history of that thing. Again, that's a picture from the web, but I noticed in your plant sale, you said next year you've got white oaks available. I don't know if you collected the acorns and you're growing them and they'd be 2 years old, but there are states, I think Virginia is one of them, that offers acorns in the fall for free. And I've got to find out more about that, but I've heard that from 2 or 3 different states. So then you can get your own, but you know what? You can get your own on your own. There really are, there's enough oaks around. And when we have decent oak acorn production, excuse me, particularly the red oak group, boy, there are acorns all over the place. It's really easy to get them. Just keep in mind, red oaks germinate in the spring, white oaks germinate in the fall. So the white oak groups have to go in a pot or in the soil that fall right away. The red oaks you can put in a Ziploc bag with peat moss to keep fungus from growing, a little bit of moisture, and put it in the refrigerator all winter long. That's the best way to keep the mice from eating it, because your major problem in getting acorns through the winter is mice that are going to try to eat them all winter long. And then you plant it in the spring.
Okay. There was a question that came in about growing from acorns, and you had mentioned all the action from acorn weevils. Do you have to consider acorn weevils at all when you're thinking about which acorns you're choosing to try to germinate?
Well, the best thing is to collect the acorns shortly after they fall, put them in a bag again, or a can or a plastic container or something, and you will see the acorn weevils will come out in a couple of days. So you can see whether there's one in an acorn, because there's a hole in the acorn. First of all, an acorn can germinate after a single acorn weevil has eaten part of it and then exited. If you have 2 or 3 acorn weevils in a single acorn, that's probably not going to make it. But then I would choose the ones that don't have any acorn weevils in them. So wait till they emerge. They will actually chew. They want to get underground as fast as possible. They'll chew right through your plastic bag or whatever. So look at it frequently, and then you can see which acorns are infested and which ones are not.
Gotcha.
If you leave the acorns under the tree for a couple of weeks, you're not going to get any, because everything else will get them first.
Okay. Good tips. So those of us who may not want to start an oak from an acorn in their backyard, do you have suggestions from learning a lot from the local area? Are there good nurseries in New Jersey, Pennsylvania that that sell a wide variety of oaks in retail, not wholesale?
You'd think I would know that.
Sure.
I bet you Jenkins has a better feel of who's offering oaks around here than I do.
Sure.
Octorara nursery probably does, but I haven't looked at their inventory lately. You know, one thing I didn't mention, which is an option, is planting bare root whips. I've also had really good luck with that. It just, you know, it was lucky that it fell on me, but there was a big planting done by Penn State Extension about 18 years ago, and they had about 100 bare root whips left over. And they said, do you want them? I said, sure. You know, so I took them. I couldn't deal with them all at once. So I just laid the root part in my little pond. So it was underwater. And I planted them over the next couple of weeks. I think I got 100% survivorship. They did wonderfully. And if you were to buy them, they're like $1.50 each. So, and that's a tree that's already this tall. So it's much farther along than your 1 year or 2 year old acorn. And it's cheap and it works.
And just for those of you who are still with us out there, Doug did mention in one of our beginning slides for Jenkins, we will have white oaks available in our outdoor nursery for our garden shop in the fall. So if you're local and you can wait till fall which is a great time to plant, you can come in and check out our selection. Okay. All right. There's a lot of questions. I'm trying to come through. This is an interesting one because it did sound like maybe you were looking to elicit some help with coppicing. It looks like we have a master gardener. Says, can master gardeners help by experimenting with coppicing and teaching gardeners how to coppice trees into shrubs to fit new ones into a small garden? Do you feel like this is a new thing to explore?
Sure. You know, the downside is you've got to start with a tree that's already 3 or 4 inches in diameter. So that's a tree that's several years old. And if you have a tree several years old, you might be reluctant. Oh, I don't want to cut it down. That's what you have to do. Cut it down almost to the floor there. But if there's a situation where you can do that, it'd be great. Have some a real life experience of this is what a coppice looks like and follow it. I don't know the history of that picture I saw on the web. I doubt if it was done for the reasons we're talking about, but it was done all the time in the past. And it's not just oaks that coppice well. Black cherries, a lot of deciduous trees make good coppice. So sure, great project for a master gardener.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, again, thank you so much for your interest and for writing all those wonderful questions. We're just kind of getting down to the end of our time tonight. And I did, Doug, not to put you on the spot, but did you want to mention anything about the Homegrown National Park before we let people go?
Thank you. Yeah, we do have this new initiative, homegrownnationalpark.org. The real object is to change the culture. So in order to do that, we have to reach beyond the choir. People say you only talk to the choir. And I say, well, it's only the choir that invites me. There are millions of people out there that don't understand that they are the future of conservation. So we've created this website and this supposedly national movement to get everybody to start to landscape more with ecological function in mind. The low-hanging fruit is to cut the area of lawn you have in half by adding things like oaks and other trees and plantings to your yard. If we did that with all the acreage of lawn in this country, that would give us 20 million acres to put towards conservation. So our initial goal in Homegrown National Park is to have 20 million acres recorded on the map of the US. You join Homegrown National Park for nothing. It's free. And then you put your location, you fill out where your location is and the amount of area that you're conserving. If you got a little wood lot in the backyard, or if you cut this much area of your lawn out, and that goes under, and then your little area of your county is going to light up with a little firefly, and we want the whole country to light up. So this is it's a grassroots call to action to reduce the area of lawn, put in more natives, and get rid of the invasive species that are planted on your property. The burning bush, the callery pear, the barberry, all the things that are invading our natural areas. So get everybody doing that. We've got a national movement.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Doug. This was wonderful. We're so appreciative that you were with us tonight and imparting so much of your knowledge. So again, thanks for taking the time to be with us. And thank you to the over 200 people who are still with us right now. So just to mention it again, we are recording, and I will process the video and send that out to everyone who registered tonight. So it'll just take me a little bit. So early next week, you can, hope to get an email from me with the recording. So, and again, Doug, thanks for letting us do that. So any last thoughts, Doug? Otherwise, we're gonna say goodnight.
I mean, it is springtime. It's a great time to plant trees, but it's not a good time to find acorns. So you're
Right.
gonna have to start from an existing tree. Good luck to everybody.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, Doug, thank you again for being with us, and thanks to everyone out there, and hopefully we'll see you next month at our next Third Thursday lecture. All right. Good night, everybody.